Hello and welcome back. Happy Monday, everyone. Today we are going to start delving into the Civilization 7 Dev Diaries, starting with the first two, which cover both ages and also leaders and civs. We will be reading through these and covering these, as well as doing catch-up. I think they're on Dev Diary 4 or 5, something to this effect, and so we'll be taking a look at these as time goes on. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hey all, I'm Sarah, or Sarah, your community manager for Meier's Civilization 7, and I'm super excited to announce Happy Monday. Just kidding, we don't know when this was pubbed, so we can't really know what day of the week it was to know which happy salutation is appropriate. But announce that we'll be rolling out a series of developer blogs in the coming months. These blogs are written by members of the Fire Access team and are tailored specifically for our Civilization community, so we're interlopers here. The Victorians. We'll be diving deep, or delving, who knows, into the details that make Civilization 7 so special. So if you love getting into the nitty-gritty, we do. Maybe we could even bring up a spreadsheet here. No, probably not. The children are watching. Today's blog will cover ages, our biggest new feature in Civilization 7, written by creative director Ed Beach. Life's a beach. Dig it. As always, I'm here for any questions or feedback you've got. Happy reading. That's a sort of happy salutation. We're a fan of that. I could get behind happy reading. But okay. We will see that we will be able to choose a starting age here, and that is what we'll be covering today. Antiquity, exploration, modern, and okay, let's get into it. Hello, Civ fans. My name is Ed Beach, creative director on Sid Meier's Civilization 7 at Fire Access Games. I'm excited to kick off a series of developer blogs on the topic I know the community has been discussing in great detail: ages. And how long have they been discussing it? Ages. My goal here is to provide you with an overview of how ages work and share some of the thinking on why we decided to implement the system in the first place. I'll also be providing greater detail in areas the community has had some questions on, such as the mechanics of how we handle age transitions to ensure your journey through the ages feels epic and fun. And the Civilization has been kind of an interesting game in the sense that it's tracking from like 4000 BC to the futuristic era, and that is something that is incredibly difficult to do because a lot of mechanics become completely outdated as you advance into kind of a new age or a new way of approaching things or doing stuff like this. Like the mechanics you do for creating a good game that's a simulation of some sort of real world phenomenon before computing is fundamentally different after computing, and the level of complexity you need to properly simulate these things is just insane. And Civilization 7, or Civilization in general, has done this abstraction by toning down the degree to which they care about something being a simulation, and instead turning up the sensitivity towards things being a game. And so they're not exactly directly trying to simulate stuff, but give you a good enough feel that you are transitioning through time while having a sensitivity to the fact that you're doing a game over a simulation, in terms of the game versus simulation trade-off. And so it's fascinating to see how they implement stuff across different areas of time, because stuff changed a whole lot, over the past 6,000 years. So, introducing ages. As we've talked before, they represent a fundamental or significant gameplay evolution for Civilization. One as big as when we first moved from squares to hexes. Fundamentally, Ages divides a single game of Civilization into distinct playable chapters, and the mechanics have to, work for each one of these chapters, and chapters layered on top of each other when you're in an age that your opponents are not. Every age is designed to capture an essence of a specific period of human advancement, achieved by fulfilling the age with historical relevant events. And as you go from one age to the next, your empire evolves, you select a new civilization that comes equipped with a fresh set of bonuses, units, and buildings. So this is the difference in how things have changed from Civ 6. The new civilization carries forward key elements of your past, and by the end of the campaign, you'll have created unique cultural lineage through history in your journey to build an empire to stand the test of time. The journey through the ages is a new experience that we've never had before in Civilization, although other 4X games have done this sort of thing. I think it's Humankind, for example. You can choose between two civilizations as you advance to the next age. Each one stone with different bonuses, and so you will play out differently. The idea of building a unique cultural lineage as opposed to your empire being represented by a single civ across all time. If you're interested in learning about the creative driving forces behind Ages, the idea is that history is built in layers. I encourage you to check out our dev panel discussion at PAX West, but for this particular blog, I want to talk about Ages from a more game mechanics design perspective. So we get a nice little picture, which we'll maybe use in the thumbnail, and we see, you know, a sprawling city, which is beautiful, but often we don't actually zoom in when we're playing games. So this is the type of stuff we see less often when we're actually playing. But let's continue. Why Ages? When my team of designers and I first sat down to brainstorm ideas for Civilization 7, we started taking an honest look at Civ 6. I tasked everyone to build a list of what they'd like to improve on and come back and compare notes. And Fire Axis, we've always said that we are our own harshest critics. Man, I feel like anyone who's ever said that is actually, like, they haven't met the real haters. You know what I mean? Like, the nothing you do is right type of haters. The type of haters where you're like, you're not even reasonable, bro. But anyways, but even, I guess they're haters, not critics at that point, right? Okay. But even as I was surprised at how critical the designers were, no stone was left unturned, and we looked through our feedback. One particular issue kept coming back over and over again. Late game Civilization is just not that fun to play. It's an interesting one. So one of the... I mean, so the thing is it becomes more and more stuff to manage as time goes on, and like much like real life empires, the simulation of what you're doing, you start to collapse under the weight of the expanse of what's going on. This is why, like, a lot of empires historically collapse is they're just too big to maintain administrative oversight over the entire empire, and this tends to cause empires to collapse. And so it's in some games, or in some ways, the way in which you kind of move through a game of Civilization with this like collapse inward on yourself in terms of the gameplay experience is a simulation of real life empires. But in order to tackle this issue, we needed to break that thought down into a few specific root causes. Here are the main things we identified. Okay, snowballing, and this is this is something the AI, you need, the difficulty levels give just the AI a huge advantage in terms of start, and so you start off with like a negative snowball, but yeah, usually there's like an event horizon where you just pass the AI and the game becomes trivial, and the game is like challenging and interesting before then, but the solution there is to have a stronger AI, which is complicated. It's a really hard thing to do, but snowballing refers to when you start with something small, it gathers momentum, and then it becomes unstoppable. In Civ, this is expressed when your empire advances too fast for your opponents to catch up, or you've fallen so far behind that you can't catch up. In both scenarios, your choices and decisions have little effect on the ultimate outcome. And so, yeah, often when you're in a bad situation, you feel like one of your choices should get you a good outcome, but the truth is when you're in a really bad situation, no matter what your choice is, you achieve a bad outcome, even if you play perfectly, and similarly, when you're really far ahead, no matter what your choice is, you achieve a really good outcome. This notably inhibits your ability to, like, learn how to play and understand games, just in a general sense, because, if you hit the event horizon where everything works, then it's harder to learn because you don't receive negative feedback, or if everything fails, it's harder to learn because you don't receive, positive feedback. But here we have lots of micromanagement. Civilization, like many 4X games, can be mapped onto a simple linear graph. As time increases, the amount of actions you have to take increases. Actions per turn, I think, is more or less what he's thinking about here. This is manageable in the first few hours, what many players feel is the most fun, where you have a few cities, some builders, and a small army, but the more you play, the bigger your empire gets, and suddenly you are making decisions for dozens of cities, moving dozens of units one by one, etc. This is both tedious to the player and makes every decision feel less important. This is true. In some sense, it would be nice, I suppose, to have an interesting, like, type of strategy game would be one where you only have a cabinet, and you give the cabinet general rules for how you want them to manage the empire, and then the cabinet goes and does the things, in which case your instructions to the cabinet are always, similar in terms of game action, and it's their execution of it, the execution of it for them, becomes the thing where they manage a greater and greater number of things, and the way that that could be explained is they have sub-cabinets and subcommittees and these types of things, and the bureaucratic, stuff sort of expands, and you can lead into an efficiency, with each layer of expansion needed for additional bureaucracy and this type of stuff. Just a more bureaucratically focused strategy game would be a bit interesting, but that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. Civ balancing. Civ draws inspiration from historical events, cultures, so their unique abilities, units, and buildings must be both relevant to their identity while also being balanced across a game that spans all of history. So often you just get one or two unique units and it's relevant for 10% of the game, if that. And so this doesn't necessarily feel rewarding. Because of this, every Civ is strong at a particular point in the game, but can be generic during other points. Yep, if you have a bonus for industrial sectors in Civ 6, and you don't have industrial sectors yet because it's the super early game, it doesn't feel good. What's interesting is that due to snowballing, competitive Civ players rarely pick late game Civs because by the time those abilities and units come online, someone has built up an insurmountable lead. This is a difficult thing from a balance perspective and a gameplay perspective, but in terms of thinking of Civ as a simulation of history, the snowball is maybe less important. But again, as we kind of mentioned earlier, Civilization generally has more of a bias towards gamification of history rather than simulation and representation of history. But let's continue on. There are a few things the team has identified, and the ultimate kicker is how they express themselves in a single data point. More than half of the Civilization 6 players have never finished a campaign. That's insane. That is quite the data point, but that definitely makes sense, especially if they're starting multiple campaigns, much like that guy starting that loud car engine outside. Now, we've heard from some members of the community who wonder, is this actually an issue that needs solving? This is a good question, because, if you really enjoyed the early game, you could keep restarting games. If players are having fun with Civ in a way that is currently built, what's the problem? The problem is I guess this is a problem with something like EU4 as well, but the problem is if you're working on designing an enormous aspect of the game, and half that or if you design a game and half your development time is spent on the back half of the game, then it wouldn't make much sense, or it would be really unfortunate if most players just don't even get there, because in some sense you're wasting development time. So you should either make a shorter game or something to this effect. I suppose the threat of late game is maybe somewhat interesting, but in some sense it reminds me of Victoria 3, where there is no World War I kind of mechanic, but a lot of players, for performance reasons, at least up until patch 1.7, couldn't play until the really late game anyways. So at that point, why would you bother making a World War mechanic that's supposed to hit off in the early 1900s if players can't make it there in the first place? And so as performance improves, then you start to maybe wanting to add in the late game stuff. But it does seem to a problem if you're spending a bunch of development resources on a point in time where people aren't playing. From our perspective, not finishing the game is a signal that players are hitting points where they're no longer having fun. This makes sense. We want everyone to have a great experience from start to finish. We know that players often feel the beginning of Civ hours are magical, and we want to make sure that every part of the game feels just as epic and as exciting as that initial rush. Sounds good. So with this issue in mind, along with the insight that history is built in layers that we've previously outlined, we decided that the best way to tackle these challenges is to break up the game into historically themed chapters. A useful analogy for thinking about the structure is a book series. Each age has its own story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. When the books are combined together, they tell a full epic tale of your empire. The books, of course, being Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. That type of anthology. 3 ages. I guess that's what we're going to have here. No, okay. So we're going to have more than 3 ages, I imagine. It playing the age. It might surprise you to know that from our playtest and feedback, the actual experience of playing an age in Civilization 7 feels very familiar to playing a traditional game of Civ. Playing an entire age feels like familiar to a traditional game. I guess let's read on. As many of our fans know, that seems like a kind of wild sentence that implies that singular games are now 7 times as long. As many of our fans know, Sid Meier had a rule of thirds when designing a sequel. 33% brand new features, 33% improving previous features, and 33% staying roughly the same. That seems like an arbitrary heuristic that's probably pretty good. We're continuing that tradition in Civ 7, and what's crucial to the game is the stuff that still feels like Civ. Each age, in some sense, is playing like a tighter, more focused campaign of Civ. Okay, I guess they are about that life. Just as before, you'll build your capital, discover the lands around you, find resources, and cooperate with or compete with your fellow civs. What's different this time around is that every age has key elements that are unique to that age and include civilizations. So, which we will be discussing kind of the second dev diary here, Leaders and Civs. But civilizations are age exclusive and come with equipped unique abilities, units, civics, buildings, or improvements. The unique part of each civilization are always relevant to that age and thus make the civ feel like they're competing at the height of their power, which this seems like a good, nice improvement. Waiting around to build your unique unit and then being so far ahead that it doesn't matter, or so far behind that it doesn't matter, is kind of feels bad. Resources. Each age contains a set of obtainable resources on the map that were available during that time period. Some resources span multiple ages, while others are exclusive to an individual age. This really makes a lot of sense. Horses stop becoming a useful strategic resource, when you have tanks and trench warfare and these types of things. So it makes sense that they would have a limited scope, and this seems like an improvement. Civics and technology. Ages determine which civics and technologies can be researched. Now this is giving me, little memories of millennia where you could have different types of ages, the kind of the standard age, or you could have variable ages, and these variable ages would change which type of text could be researched. Buildings and units. Available types of buildings, units, and wonders determined by the age. This seems fine. I wonder if everyone is actually going to all be in the same age at once, or if you enter ages at a different type of pace than the other player. I guess we maybe get that question answered, but this makes sense. Now we're not building Stonehenge in the industrial era or something like this because it wasn't built before. I assume that's what the Wonders thing will kind of mean. Independent powers. Independent powers are minor factions on the map that can be interacted with. So I'm guessing they're going to vary to some extent or become more sparse as the game goes on later. Game systems. Certain game systems are only available during each age, ensuring that every age feels unique and exciting to engage with. We love to see it. And kind of with our preamble, this is also one of the problems, is you're trying to create a game that allows you to pass through time periods that are fundamentally different, and if you were designing a game for each individual age, you would design different systems. And so this is, I guess this is what they're trying to do, is that they are trying to, instead of maybe, a way to think about it is they're trying to mesh together several different games that have a lot of similarities, that have kind of different characteristics in some other ways, but there's still a unifying sort of theme and transition. Kind of like if you were to play Paradox games in a mega campaign, is maybe the idea, where you play Crusader Kings 3, which is way different than EU4, and then you get to the time period where you play EU4, and then the systems change. Of course, to a much less degree of the difference between CK and EU4. Playable map area. Ages determine the overall size and scope of the playable map, expanding as the player transitions into new ages. I guess we will have Terra Incognita, and, here be dragons types of effects. Okay. Age progresses determines how far along you are in that age. Every turn contributes a small amount of age progress, while competing things like milestones along Legacy Path will contribute larger amounts to the age progress meter. Generally speaking, you can expect an age to last around 150 or 200 turns on standard speed. That is a big chunk of time, relative to... I believe standard is like, in vanilla, I can't remember the exact, in Civ 6, I don't play on standard very often, but I think an entire game is supposed to be like 500 turns, and so if there's like 7 ages, this would imply like 1,400 turns, which would be a considerably larger, period of time, or roughly 3 to 4 hours of play. Okay. Regarding the aforementioned legacy paths, these are a series of objectives for you to complete during an age, categorized as science, military, culture, and economy objectives. Every legacy path contains several milestones, providing you with greater rewards as you progress down a given path. Each new reward unlocks one or more bonuses that you can take advantage of during the transition into the next stage. Okay, so we get temporary bonuses. Completing a legacy path in its entirety unlocks a golden age legacy that you'll have access to in the next age. Failing to complete even one milestone of a legacy path gives you an associated Dark Age legacy. So we are seeing the Golden and Dark Ages kind of be brought back here in terms of this mechanic. Every path and its objectives are themed to an age, bringing out the essence of that time period. Also sounds good. As you near the end of the age, you'll be confronted with a crisis. What type of crisis? An identity crisis, a midlife crisis, time to buy a new car. As the name suggests, crises are something all civilizations in the game must face and navigate, and are themed to every age. Every crisis comes with stages that intensifies over time, making it more challenging to maintain your empire if you don't adapt. This sounds super excited from a gameplay perspective. In addition to gameplay moments, you'll have to select which crisis policies you want to take on. Interesting that you'll be able to select and they won't be foisted upon you, but from a gameplay experience perspective, that's probably more enjoyable. In contrast to the beneficial social policies you slot in when completing civics, crisis policies are negative ones that are slotted into their own separate set. Okay, so we have negative sort of policies. That's cool. There's several reasons why we created the crisis system, because we were having a midlife crisis ourselves. First, they add a jolt of variety and excitement to the end of the age, making the late game of an age feel climactic and epic. We do like that. In terms of... And they kind of introduced this idea when talking about novels, and their layers of novels producing kind of like an epic series. Novels have a narrative structure, right? You have like the rising action, the climax, and then the falling action. And so giving the language here of climactic really fits with their metaphor here, that they are going to have this like cyclical thing, and then when you start a new age, it's a little like starting a new book, per their metaphor. They provide an interesting challenge for the player to navigate. There's no right way to adapt, adding a ton more replay value. I really do think Civ has a lot of replay value in general. In terms of different civilizations playing a lot differently. Although we'll be seeing those differences change in how they are different with Civ 7 based on the fact that we will have multiple paths. And finally, they reflect a narrative reality of many civilizations: creation, growth, crisis, and rebirth. That leads to the reshaping of the world and the ushering of new age. So, okay, we see 3 ages, actually. Just 3 ages. Okay, so we were thinking 7. So this 150 to 200 turns really isn't necessarily extending the game that much on standard speed, kind of relative to Civ 6. I really wish I knew what the standard age, standard turns for standard speed are, but we always play on like much slower speeds. But here we have Hatshepsut, which is the Civ leader that you would kind of select here, and we will see that we have an Antiquity Age, 3 other Civs, or multiple other Civs we can select. These one is a placeholder. We see placeholder here, and so we will see that as time advances into a different age, we will play a different civilization. And so we will also see there are going to be kind of a linear path that we will go normally. Like we have to, if we're playing Egypt, then we will automatically unlock Abbasid, right? But if we want to swap to Mongolia, we require 3 horse resources, and then leader-based unlock if available. We see other options, and so there will be a standard path, and then there will be alternative paths, and which path makes sense for you will probably vary depending on your conditions. And so the fact that you branch and take different paths each time, this is something I really enjoyed about Millennia. The feeling that each run was a little bit different and how you played it was different, and these types of things. And I guess we are seeing this here in Civilization 7. Let's talk about age transitions. A full campaign of Civ 7 is one that goes through 3 ages. Antiquity, Antiquity, Exploration, and Modern. Once the age is completed, all players and any AI opponents experience an age transition simultaneously. So it is a simultaneous age transition, which again is somewhat similar to what we experienced with Millennia. During an age transition, three things happen. You select a new civilization from the new age to represent your empire, you choose which legacies you want to retain in the new age, and the game world evolves in both ways, both big and small, like changing which resources are available. When it comes to selecting a new civilization in a new age, you won't be able to just choose a new civ at random. There are three factors that determine your options. First, if there is any historical or geographical connection between the past civ and the future one, you'll have a choice that's more rooted in history. Some examples we've shared so far is to include Antiquity Egypt to Exploration Abbasid, as well as Maurya to Chola India. Hopefully I pronounced all that right, but here we have Maurya, I don't know how to pronounce that word, Chola India, and then Mughal India. Interesting. Second, certain leaders will automatically unlock certain civics due to particularly strong ideas. Choosing Himiko, for example, means that you will always be able to play as Meiji Japan in the modern age, which makes some sense. But maybe you transition from playing China to playing Japan and this type of thing. Here we see a potential path from Rome to Rome, or so they think. Yeah, everyone's trying to be Rome and say that they're the successor to Rome, but, you know, the truth hurts, they're not. We see Rome go into Norman, go into French, but notably, the Normans expanded into England, so Norman could go into the, Great Britain very easily as well, and this would be kind of a sensible sort of transition that you could experience in games, so this would make sense. Finally, gameplay actions you take can unlock non-historical paths. This is something we know the Civ 7 community the Civ community rather, has discussed at length. We've definitely enjoyed your reactions and memes to the idea of turning Egypt into Mongolia. That said, we wanted to include this option for many reasons. First of all, we think it's fun and reflects Civ's what-if spirit of experimentation. Yeah, Civ can be a little bit silly sometimes, and sometimes they sacrifice the idea of having a game that's a simulation to the silliness. Second, we wanted to provide players with the possibility of making dramatic strategy changes, especially if they aren't focused on playing historically. If you find yourself surrounded by horses, wouldn't it be interesting if, rather than going across great nations during the exploration, you use Mongolia's powerful cavalry to sweep the home continent? Finally, we think it reflects some of the core ideas behind history is built in layers. The notion is that history is just one of many possible paths, and civilizations are ultimately shaped and determined by their people. After selecting your new civilization, you can then pick and choose which legacies you want to carry forward into the new age, which again you unlock based on performing well in the previous age. Legacies can only be selected if you have earned enough legacy points to acquire them, and the latter which can be obtained primarily through completing milestones and legacy paths. For example, completing a milestone in science gives you a science point, which can be then used to grab a science legacy in the next age. Legacies come with a variety of different costs and bonuses. Some legacies are easily acquired. Leader attributes cost only 1 point and can be grabbed in bulk. Others are more expensive and require may require prerequisite accomplishments, like the Golden Age legacies mentioned earlier. One legacy that I'd like in particular is Change Capital. It's free and strategically useful for moving your capital inland to one of your settlements along the coast as you prepare to take on the challenges and strategic opportunities of a new age. Like you're moving towards exploration, being more maritime oriented, and you want your capital on the coast. Something like this, perhaps. Once you select your new civ and legacies and new age begins, your game undergoes a series of changes across the board. All civilizations begin anew with an updated civics and technology tree. That is interesting because, in some sense, this kills the snowball, right? If you were advancing techs a whole ton, and then now everyone has a new tree, then you reset any sort of advantage that has been kind of previously had in terms of culture or science. New resources fill the map, and the world expands. From antiquity to exploration, you'll be able to research shipbuilding to cross great oceans and reach distant lands, which turns out are already occupied with undiscovered civilizations who may not welcome your presence. You'll be able to overbuild, construct new buildings on top of your old ones, which have reduced yields as they're less powerful in the new new age, which makes sense. New legacy, and also the fact that overbuilding is a thing. If I have a antiquity factory and I build a modern factory on top of it, I've effectively, and someone else can just build a modern factory on top of a blank square, I'm effectively reducing the snowball effect, right? That was had by the earlier empire, because we both have to be fair, the antiquity, the one that already has the factory, will have more production probably to build that initial or construction, to build that secondary thing. But the fact that we're building over things means that if you have a lot of things entering an age, that they need to be built over, rather than continue to increase and accumulate more advantage, is an indication of how the snowball effect is reduced, but still to some extent present. New legacy paths present you with updated objectives, and the same new systems come online. Religion, which plays a minor role in the Antiquity Age, becomes an essential driver during the Exploration Age. With a new civilization in hand, so much of the world changing, it naturally raises a question. How do you maintain a cohesive sense of identity for your empire? This is something we spend a little bit of time tweaking and fine-tuning. I'm sure we'll continue to make adjustments once players get their hands on the game. There are several things that help you retain your sense of identity. Leaders remain the same across ages. Leaders persist across all ages, ensuring you have a sense of who is a part of your empire and who are your rivals. Relations that you develop persist, and leaders continue to grow by leveling up their attributes. It also helps to lend a sense of personal storytelling to each campaign, as you decide which of the other leaders deserve to be your cherished allies or bitter enemies through the ages. Traditions are always available. Investing in Civ's exclusive trees unlocks traditions, social policies that can be used in any age. In the modern age, it's entirely up to whether you want to slot in all your social policies with traditions, and some leaders have bonuses for doing so. Interesting. The leaders that have a sensitivity towards history, maybe. Ageless buildings. Some buildings are so essential they cannot be emplaced. Any wonders you've built will remain on the map, as well as any unique quarters you've constructed. Which we don't know what unique quarters are exactly, but we could speculate. Commanders persist. Commanders are particularly powerful and impactful units, gaining levels as they survey the battlefield. Your investments in these units will pay off in the long run, as all commanders' attributes experience continue across the ages. Age, we get a nice little picture, and here's the Colosseum down here. Very cool. Age transitions reflect the moments of possibility in a game of Civilization 7. If you're falling too far behind, age transitions will offer you a way to get back into the game, because, as we mentioned earlier, some of the effects they discuss curb the effect of a snowball. You can double down on a preferred playstyle or pivot to a completely different civ if you find yourself outmatched in certain parts of the game. Snowballing into an unstoppable juggernaut is no longer as obvious an outcome, although there will be some snowballing, it seems, still, but we want to make sure that you're still rewarded for playing well through an abundance of legacy points, golden age options, and more. So they've, in some sense, a lot of times people will really like to have long-term advantages, and they will feel good from a player perspective, but in reality, in games, generally speaking, really, really short-term advantages are stronger, because you can convert those into bigger advantages as time goes on, and getting a really long-term advantage that will persist permanently is often less valuable than a really temporary advantage. In some sense, they are making it so that the really short-term advantages and the ability to convert those is diminished, but rewarding the thematic and fun type of stuff that you get from more of a long-term play style. An example is in Civilization, although I don't know the balance of Civ 6 all that well, I'm not as well versed, is being really, really gold-oriented is better than being like science and production oriented, even though when you reach the hyper late game, or as you reach the kind of like later periods of the game, production and science is what you want. Just the thing is when you focus on gold early, you can transition that into science and production much better than if you focus on science and production early, you effectively in some ways fall behind. And so the fact that you can kind of transition and turn and burn is like an aspect of this. And so I think they are nerfing the competitive play style that plays for these short-term advantages because it's more rewarding or feels better. It feels more narrative to play for long-term advantages is kind of what I gather from this. We have a future potential. With Ages, we've set out to create a system that's not just solve some of the long-standing issues we wanted to tackle, but also presents you with something new, something that offers a fresh take on Civ to make the game more dynamic, inviting, and interesting. With Ages, we're able to reach new levels when it comes to historical immersion. We tailor the content specifically for that age, and as you compete with your fellow empires at their height of powers, we can provide deeper and richer experience where your unique units and abilities are all more immediately available. And by design, Ages already come with plenty of features. There's less of a need to wait for expansions like in the past. We can't wait for you to experience this new structure for yourself. Building Civilization 7 with Ages as core concepts has completely shifted how we approach making a Civ game. In essence, it sounds like they're trying to layer multiple games that interlock on top of each other rather than making it one contiguous game. We've had to greatly expand the total number of civs, making this the most civilizations in base game at launch in franchise history. We're really excited for what's to come in Civilization 7 and what looks like for future for the long term. Thanks for reading. If you have any questions, please continue to share them in the forums, on Reddit, and across our social media channels. Now, at the beginning of this read-through, I lied. I said we were going to cover 2 of these Dev Diaries, but considering the amount of time we've already spent on this first Dev Diary, I think we are just going to cover just this one and instead separate it into kind of multiple chapters because an hour-plus long video is not as watchable, but that's kind of our coverage for today, is we've taken a look at Ages, in Civilization 7, and kind of more of a meta perspective on how to approach the game and this type of stuff. Was interesting to hear that how they're trying to make it more narrative. I think that for those of you who are coming from Vic 3, the metaphor of it functioning like a mega campaign in some sort of sense is maybe the kind of the metaphor for what they're going for, although I imagine the systems will feel more similar than a mega campaign feels, similar, where CK feels way different than EU4 in some sense. But they're all using the same engine, and they're using the same type of map thing, and so there is some continuity in that sense when you do a mega campaign. But I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. We will again be trying to play this game on release for the stream on February 11th. I might try and contact the community team for Civ 7 and see if I can get early access, although I think that's kind of unlikely because I don't have any Civ 6 presence, really, truly. But anyways, like YouTube algorithm stuff, you know what to do. And other than that, have a happy Monday.